Okay, now you have learned how to read a job advertisement, and you should be able to at least start to see where some of your values, qualifications, and interests and aspirations line up with that job. Here's another pro tip. Most job ads are seeking an ideal person that may not exist. If that person exists, there's no guarantee that he or she wants to work for the company. And I think the same is true for you, the job seeker. Very few job postings are going to check off every single box on your dream job wish list. The question for both parties is, where is there room for compromise? If there's no room for compromise, then the job's not a good fit. For example, most of us in this building are not competitive for jobs in neurosurgery, right? But if there is some room for compromise, then it might be worth having the conversation with the employer who's hiring you. But if there's no room for compromise, it's just not a good fit. Disappointing, but not the end of the world. Again, if there is room for compromise, though, say you're kind of good at Adobe Premiere or you're teaching yourself, a certain set of skills, but not yet an expert, the company may be willing to train you up in those standards. But let's get back to branding. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, and I really want to drive this home because what we're going to talk about next is your resume, which is one of the most important ways that you'll represent your brand in initial introductions to possible employers. So the resume is sometimes intimidating. You may have a resume that you've used, for example, to apply for jobs that don't relate to your career field. We're going to talk about how to start to build one that does. The reason I had you look at the job market before we start digging in on resumes is because a lot of us at this age have resumes that are just simple lists of our previous work history. And I think there's a more effective way to write a resume, and that is as a response to a specific job ad. Why is this the case? Well, because I believe we've all had jobs in our past that may or may not be relevant to the person who is hiring us. I'll talk about my previous jobs in a minute and why they're not necessarily relevant to the job that I do now. When you bought your phone, you were probably interested in things like screen resolution, battery life, and storage space, but you probably weren't too curious about what the person who was selling it to you had for lunch. It just isn't relevant to the transaction. One of the big mistakes on resumes that I've seen is that you include a ton of information that just isn't relevant to that transaction. The example I like to give is when I was a college student, when I was your age, I was a dishwasher in a cafeteria. I wanted to work in broadcast news. No journalism job description I ever saw posted included operating an industrial dishwashing machine. It just wasn't relevant to the transaction. So what is relevant? Well, the classes I took, the internships that I completed, the time I spent working at WVU's radio station, and the cameras and editing equipment that I knew how to operate because I had taken these courses were extremely relevant to that transaction. So how can you tell what's relevant and what's not? I believe it's in the job description. And in fact, I think even the order that they put these requirements and qualifications can sometimes tell you what's most important to them. If your work history is short on experience at this point that relates to your major, that doesn't mean it's worthless. Jobs like being a dishwasher can teach us some valuable lessons about hard work, multitasking, balancing work and school, and paying our bills. I like to talk about an alumnus that I used to work with who worked her way through school as the manager of a clothing store. Her ability to fold sweaters was not relevant to her future employer in media, but her ability to manage a team of 10 salespeople, her track record of exceeding corporate sales goals, and her ability to maintain an excellent customer service rating might carry a little bit more weight. So if you are, for example, working as a host or hostess in a restaurant, your ability to seat customers and deliver food, maybe not as relevant, but some of the people skills that you've developed in doing that might be. Don't lean too heavily on that, but again, we're not interested necessarily in talking about what the day-to-day job description of somebody on a wait staff or a dishwasher might be. But again, it doesn't mean it's worthless. We'll get to that later. While you've got limited media experience at this point, there's still lots of time to gain additional experience through your internships, through maybe working in student media, like I mentioned, or with a student organization. And of course, the classes that you're taking right now may be the most relevant thing you have to talk about. We're just taking stock of where we are right now. right? So let's take another couple of minutes for an in-class exercise. On the third part of your worksheet, let's take some common traits that we can pretty safely assume that most employers are going to value. Things like problem solving, time management, critical thinking, and teamwork. We know that those things are are valuable. What's important is to demonstrate how you live up to those promises, right? We talk about the brand promise. So think back on your life map and other memories that this exercise is bringing up. Think about specific stories or specific experiences in your past that illustrate these traits of time management or conflict resolution or customer service. Don't feel like you have to answer every single one of these things on this list. There may be some traits here that you just don't have a story to demonstrate. If you get stuck on one, just skip ahead to the next one and find one that's easier to answer. And don't limit yourself to experiences that you were paid for. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. If it's something that you volunteered your time for, but you still got a good result out of it, it might be just as relevant as a position where you earned a paycheck. If you demonstrated the skill in a class, a school play, athletic event, a student organization, for now, let's count it, okay? After this, we'll meet back up and we'll talk about what your first resume might look like.